midnight screams.
You ask anybody where the scariest place to work is, you'll more than likely get hospitals, graveyards, or historical buildings where human suffering occurred. These places have documented legends or true facts. My story has no explanation. It just is. My name's Dave. I was unemployed, and Ed got me a job in a food warehouse. He used to work there and had a good rapport with the management. I was thankful at first. Now Ed and I don't talk because I quit without notice. Screw you, Ed. I can't even be sure if you had knowledge about the candy room. Now let me explain the candy room where I worked. It was in the middle of the warehouse. There were 2 automatic steel doors on both sides because the candy had to be kept at a certain temperature. The shelves had a rusty conveyor, so you could slide the chocolate down the rails. We sold in bulk, mostly to retail wholesalers and restaurants in the city, suburbs. This is important because we sold huge cocoa bags and blocks of chocolate. I made the mistake of proving I was a hard worker. The second shift boss noticed me. Who made sure the foreman noticed me? The foreman tells me, "You're quick and keep yourself busy. Why don't you come on the 3rd shift? I'll give you an extra $1 and you can work in the candy room." The first thing I noticed on 3rd shift is the quiet. It wasn't a big crew. Somewhere between 9 to 12 people worked with me. Occasionally, someone would stop by to ask me to get an order for them, or the boss would call me from the office from the front of the building. Most of the time, I was alone. I was my own boss. All I had to do was make sure those orders got out with the rest of the shipment. Then I received a new coworker. I doubt it put in an application. I don't know why I started to receive visits. Did my apparition hate how I did my job, or was it mad I had stolen a few candy bars? I have no answers. There were 4 aisles in the candy room. A numbered system guided you down the aisles to the very back. Going down the last aisle, I felt like something was watching me. Made no sense why I'd be afraid of one tiny part of the room. Next, the conveyors in the candy room moved on their own. I'd hear the spinning of wheels like a child was playing on them. Heavy boxes would roll down by themselves while I was on the other side of the room. My boss was mad. I was starting to leave the candy room doors open. I got the typical "you must be out of your mind" response when I mentioned there might be a ghost. My unwanted friend never played games when the doors were open. Until it got mad, I wouldn't listen to my boss. One day, I was working with the door closed after being warned the next violation would be a write-up. I was in the middle of the candy room. I heard the steel door go up. Thinking it was a coworker needing an order, I went to the door. I heard a sharp staccato voice whisper, "Sweets, sweets, sweets," in my ear. I blockaded myself in the bathroom, stall for the rest of the night. Told my boss I wasn't feeling well. "Then take a couple of your sick days," as he looked at me frustrated. "Your face is pale." I took all my sick days. It's bad enough working 3rd shift. You enter and leave work at night. It's impossible to sleep because the living world is up and going. When my body caved in from lack of sleep, I could add in nightmares during the daylight hours. That voice in my ears singing, "Sweets, sweets, sweets." I came back a mess. Co-workers avoided me as I appeared near death. The foreman asked if he needed to give me a drug test. I just wanted to be given another job besides the candy room. Next came the phone. It would ring. I would pick it up and there'd be nobody on the line. I was already on thin ice with the boss, and sure wasn't going to ask if he was prank calling me. Then the call came I was dreading. I finally had a voice. The same staccato voice that said, "Hi, Dave. Sweets, sweets, sweets." The phantom called me by name. Now the door stayed open and the phone was off the hook. I packed 2/3 of my orders because I wasn't going to work in that last aisle. I was tired of being stared at by a ghostly peeper. My boss sent me home with one's last chance for tomorrow. My last night I went to the candy room like I was marching to death row. I was told to keep the doors closed and the phone on the hook. All went well. I thought the phantom was tired of messing with me. I came back from the second break with only 2 hours left of my shift. I was feeling pretty good. I nonchalantly hit the switch and the candy room door opened. Then the lights went out. I heard all the conveyors rolling like a Las Vegas casino. An orange ball is starting to grow into the size of a boulder by the last aisle. "Sweets! Sweets! Sweets!" a voice bellowed. I took off running in the darkness, never looking behind me. I was sprinting like a rocket had been lit in my rear. I made it to the front door and jumped out as the phantom faded away. My boss called later that day to say he was taking my early absence as an indication I quit. I guess I'll never find who or what I shared my nights with in the candy room. I hope the next employee doesn't experience worse. I'm seeking a job now. No answers on applications, except I got a call from Hershey. I never applied there. Someone tell my candy room coworker I'll find my own employment. I work as a data entry clerk for a small insurance company. My name is Sean. I work as a data entry clerk for a small insurance company. Every day, I sit at my desk, surrounded by towering stacks of paperwork. The task of inputting data into the computer has become a mindless routine. Staring at my computer screen, my eyes begin to feel heavy as I reach for my coffee. I take a sip of my mocha coffee before returning to work. Thankfully, the coffee seemed to do the trick. I spent hours typing, but it felt like minutes. As I looked at the neat stack of paperwork I had just finished, I felt something like a sense of pride. However, that warm feeling was replaced with cool dread as I saw the remaining towers of papers I needed to work on. I was tired, but I knew that I had a deadline, so I grabbed my coffee and took a sip. To my surprise, what I expected to taste and what I tasted were different things entirely. I was expecting to taste mocha, but when I took a sip of my coffee, the coffee was caramel. I hated caramel flavoring. I spit the vile liquid out and turned my cup, assuming I had somehow swapped cups with someone else. However, what I saw when I turned my cup confused me. The cup had my name on it. I didn't have time to think too deeply into it. I didn't want to fall behind on my work. So I tossed the coffee cup into the green trash bin under my desk and got back to it. I typed for hours and watched as my coworkers went home for the evening. The workday ends at 4, but it was dark when I finished my work for the day. As I made my way outside, I called a cab. I always call the same cab company when I get off work late. The driver for the night shift is always friendly, and after many rides together, I consider him my friend. I sat on the bench outside, and as I waited, I went to pull out a cigarette, when next to the pack, I felt a piece of paper in my pocket. Curious, I fished the paper out of my pocket, and upon further inspection, I realized that it was a receipt for the coffee I had purchased earlier. The receipt read, "1 large mocha coffee." Isn't that odd? I thought to myself. My thoughts of confusion, however, were cut short as I heard a car approaching. I looked up to see my favorite cab driver pulling up to the curb. I had a long day, sure, but at least now I was with a friend. I waved and smiled at him. He didn't wave or smile back. He might have even looked annoyed. Despite his seemingly annoyed state, as I entered the cab, I was excited to talk with the driver. However, this time, the cab felt different. The once warm and friendly cab driver that I had many enjoyable conversations with in the past now averted his gaze when he caught me studying him in the rearview mirror. As we rode in silence, a silence only broken once, I asked how his day was, and he never answered. The only time the driver spoke to me was to verify that we were at the drop-off destination. I looked through the window and saw that we were. I thanked the driver and tipped him as usual. After I paid him, he quickly drove away, as if he was in a hurry, and I wondered what had happened to change the demeanor of such a formerly friendly man. I walked up to my apartment building, and as I approached the door to the lobby, I could hear my neighbors fighting inside. I looked through the window and saw one of my neighbors, an elderly man, in a fistfight with another tenant in the building. I hurriedly turned my key in the door and rushed inside. When I entered, I found that the lobby was completely empty. Not only was there nobody fighting, there wasn't anyone there at all. Just me in a state of fight or flight, completely by myself. I felt foolish for a moment and decided that I really just needed to rest. I passed the other apartments before quietly slipping into my apartment. After stumbling to my bed, I fell asleep almost instantly. I felt the world fade around me. However, this rest was short-lived, as I soon woke up to the sound of my phone ringing. I answered the phone, and it was my boss. My boss told me that I was lucky I wasn't fired. Confused by this, I asked him, why? He told me that I didn't show up to work yesterday, and that I better show up today if I wanted to keep my job. Before I could reply in any way, he had already hung up. I hurriedly got ready for work and called a cab company. As I waited for the cab to come, I smoked a cigarette. When the cab pulled up, I was surprised to see that the person driving it was not the morning driver, but the nighttime cab driver. I was even more surprised that he seemed to be in a great mood. Last night was a little odd, but at least today he seemed to be back to his normal and usual self. We chatted and laughed the whole drive to work, and it made me a lot less nervous about what I knew was going to be at the least an awkward conversation with my boss. As I walked into the building, the lobby pulsed with a nervous energy, its very walls seeming to vibrate with my anxiety. I made my way to my boss's office, and I stood outside his door, mentally preparing myself for his lecture. Before I could enter his office, the door swung open, and as my boss emerged from the doorway, I was confused because he didn't seem to be angry like he was on the phone this morning. His eyes lit up as he saw me, and he said, "Good morning, Sean. I really appreciate you staying late yesterday." What should have been a moment of relief and even pride was instead a moment of confusion and dread, creating an uneasy feeling in my stomach. I was confused. I asked my boss why he called me this morning about me missing work the day prior. The smile that once seemed carved into his face dropped suddenly, replaced by a look of intense confusion. He tilted his head to the side and said, "I didn't call you this morning, Sean." The unease in my stomach intensified as I slid my hand into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "I'm pretty sure you did. Give me 1 second," I said. As my boss and I stood, each locked in this uncomfortable moment, I checked my call history. I saw that he did, in fact, call me this morning. "If you look right here, you'll see you did call me," I said to my boss as I handed him my phone. He took the phone and immediately froze. He looked at the phone. He looked at me. He looked back at the phone and giggled. "Sean, you do realize you handed me a dead phone, right?" He slid me back my phone and laughed as he said, "You're funny, Sean. I don't always understand your humor, but I know you're funny. Have a great workday." Before I could respond, he had already slid back into his office. Happy that I wasn't fired, I made my way to my desk. As I passed coworkers, they smiled at me, but I could feel their smiles fade the moment I looked away. I sat down at my desk and accidentally knocked over the bin. I went to put the bin upright, but I was thrown off by its color. As far back as I could remember, my trash bin, much like all the other bins in the office, was green. The bin that I was looking at was bright red. I heard a noise and looked up to see a coworker walking by. Their sudden presence startled me, and I blurted out, "New bins." My coworker looked at me like I was crazy before asking, "What?" I explained to my coworker that my bin has been replaced by a red one. My coworker looked at me, bewildered, and said something that I couldn't believe. "I've worked here for over 20 years. The bins have always been red." I stood up and looked at the other cubicles in the office, and sure enough, under each desk, every single bin was red. Still in disbelief, I pulled my bin from under my desk, and in the bin was a disposable coffee cup with my name written on the side. My mind reeled, and I was trying to make sense of the world around me, but it kept getting stranger. I slid my bin back under my desk and watched my coworker walk away, clearly annoyed. If my coworker would have walked away in a way that made sense, I might have been able to explain away all the other oddities I've been experiencing. What they did when they walked away, however, made no sense. I watched them walk to the back of the room by the printer and straight through the white wall. "What the fuck?" I said out loud as I walked to the same wall I had just watched my coworker vanish through. I reached out and touched it. The wall was solid. There was no way that what I saw was possible. Thinking about it made my head hurt, but I knew that something was wrong with either reality or my perception of it. I found my boss and told him that I needed to leave early for the day before I stepped outside and lit a cigarette. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and saw that it was fully charged. I called the cab company, and to my surprise, I heard a phone ring across the street from me. I looked up and saw the cab parked on the other side of the road. The driver waved me over. I crossed the street and I got in the cab. The driver looked familiar, but I couldn't remember his name. He was being very friendly, but there was something wrong with his face. I realized that while the cab driver's face looked happy and kind, his eyes looked wild and angry, almost demonic. I asked him what was wrong with his eyes, and he laughed in an octave I'd never heard before. For just a moment, the sky darkened, and I lost my ability to breathe. The cars seemed to stand still, as if time had frozen. The only proof that time wasn't frozen completely was the rapid beat of my own heart pounding in my chest. In that moment, I felt both like I was going to die and that whatever was happening wasn't ever going to stop. However, just as quickly as it came, the moment passed. I found myself shaking and staring through my fingers at the floor. I felt cold. I was afraid to look at the driver, for fear that I would not see a friendly face. I only dared look up when I heard the driver ask me a question. In a very normal and familiar voice, the cab driver asked me, "Hey buddy, are you okay?" I looked up and recognized him as the night driver for the cab company. I told him that I was fine, just a little ill. He mentioned a doctor he was going to call on my behalf. I told him that he didn't have to, but he really insisted. I thanked and paid the driver before stepping out of the cab. To my absolute horror, as I watched the cab drive away, it was rammed off of the road by a public bus. The bus slamming into the side of the cab forcefully, that for a moment it looked like they became one, like some kind of vehicular hammerhead shark. I blinked hard and rubbed my eyes. When my eyes readjusted, I was able to see the cab driver turn the corner of the road, driving the cab completely undamaged. There was no bus, and there was no crash. My head hurt. I decided I needed to get home. I hurried into my apartment building. In the lobby, there was nobody. However, every apartment door now stood open, even mine. I walked through the door of my apartment, but as I crossed through, I felt cold. Before I exited through the front door of my office building, I was so afraid that my legs gave out and I fell on the ground. The cold concrete was a reminder that I was certainly not in my apartment. It was so cold that I instinctively jumped back up to my feet. I looked back at the building and it was closed. Everyone had gone home for the day. I checked my phone and this time it didn't turn on. Without another option, I decided that I would spend the evening on the bench, under a light blanket of snow. I woke up early the next morning in my apartment, shivering in my warm bed. I checked my phone and realized that I was going to be late for work. I hurriedly got dressed and called the cab company. As I waited for the cab to come, I smoked a cigarette. When the cab driver arrived, I was nearing the end of my cigarette, so I flicked it into the street. As I entered, I noticed that it was a totally different cab driver. He didn't seem annoyed, but he didn't seem friendly. I assumed it must have been someone new. I asked, what happened to the usual daytime driver? And the new cab driver told me that he was the only cab driver the company had, and as far as he knew, the company he worked for didn't offer rides after 5 p.m. because they only had one driver. This made no sense to me. I was sure he was new. As we rode in silence, I studied his face. It was totally unfamiliar. When he dropped me off at work, I tried to pay him, but he refused payment and gave me a card to call a doctor. I took it to be kind, but I wasn't planning on calling the doctor. As I stepped out of the taxi, I shuddered at the sight of the bench. I don't know if it was a dream or not that I spent the night there, but regardless, I wasn't a fan of that bench at that moment. I looked past the bench to my job. I was eager to get back to work and get my mind off of all the craziness. I walked in, but everyone was busy working, so nobody said hi. I did, however, catch some odd glances from people before they went back to their work. I sat down at my desk, but when I tried to log onto the computer, it told me my credentials were invalid. As I tried and failed to get into my work computer, I heard someone approaching. I looked up to see my boss coming with an angry look on his face and 2 armed security guards. I tell him that I'm struggling to get into my computer, and he says to me in an angry tone, "That's because it isn't your computer. You've never worked here." I felt dizzy when I heard those words. My boss had security escort me out of the building, and as I heard the doors lock behind me, I saw the bench covered in snow in an otherwise sunny environment that could only be described as summer-like. I wiped the snow off of the bench and reached into my pocket to grab my phone. Despite removing the snow, the bench was still cold and wet. I sat uncomfortably and called a cab. I smoked a cigarette while I waited for it to come. Once I was in the cab, I heard the driver say, "Short trip today." When I looked up, I was glad to see that it was the nighttime cab driver that I remembered. I was frightened by my job. I was frightened by my neighbors, and most days I was frightened by the cab. I wondered to myself when life got so incoherent and scary. My thoughts were interrupted by the driver letting me know that we arrived at my apartment. As I got out of the cab, I remembered that I had forgotten to pay him. So I reached into my pocket for my wallet, but I couldn't find it. When I turned around to see if I had left it in the cab, I saw that he had since left. I turned back around to face my apartment, and my heart sank. It was nighttime now, and I was standing in an empty lot, where a building might have once stood, but where no building stood now. I stood alone in the lot and noticed snow falling. Not knowing where to go, I walked back towards the road, where I found a familiar bench covered in snow. I wiped the snow away and lay down to rest. I closed my eyes, and as I drifted away from the world, I felt heavy and cold. I woke up to the sound of a car horn. It was the nighttime cab driver. He asked me if I was getting in or not. I chose to get in. It would be a nice break from the weather. He studied me from the side of his eye and asked, "Same place as usual?" I answered yes, and as we rode, he mentioned that I should call the doctor he gave me the card for. I thanked him again for the card and reassured him I would call the doctor. He gave me a kind nod and left. As he drove off into the distance, I watched him go. But nothing crazy or unexpected happened. Maybe I don't have to call that doctor, I thought to myself. I turned away from the road, but what I saw didn't make any sense at all. I saw that damn bench that I've suffered on so many times, and that was not a surprise to me. What surprised me, what shocked me to my core, was the decaying structure of what appeared to be a defunct, out-of-use building. The building looked similar to the one I work at, but it was in such a state of disrepair, it would be hard to believe anyone has been there for years. I opened the front door, and the smell of still air made the place feel extra abandoned. I heard rhythmic tapping sounds from deeper into the building. I was so scared. I didn't want to search any further, but I felt like I had to. I had already gotten this far, and I wasn't sure of the alternative. I followed the sound of the typing. It grew louder as I drew closer. I was halfway to my destination when I realized where I was headed. I was a layer cake of dread and anxiety when I walked up to my desk. I peeked over the top of my desk, and I saw a man sitting in the dark, staring at a blank monitor, typing. I asked, "Who are you?" The man looked up at me with what I recognized as my own face before vanishing. My mind struggled to grasp what was going on in front of me. I stood alone in the dark above my rotting desk for what felt like an eternity. As my mind reeled, I was about to turn away from the desk and leave. To run away from that desk, to run out of this building, to keep running until things made sense to me again, but as I went to turn away, the computer screen lit up the room. I turned back towards the computer and recognized the login screen. Not knowing what else to do, I put in my username and password. To my surprise, my credentials worked. The computer loaded up my desktop, All of my work files were still there, but when I clicked in on them, they were all empty Word documents, hundreds of professionally labeled blank files. Other than what was missing, there was also something new. A folder on my desktop, labeled My Diagnosis. All of this was too much. My mind ached, my eyes burned, my stomach hurt. I felt so cold, but I had to know what was in that folder. I clicked open the folder. Inside of the folder was a PDF file titled Patient File, Sean M. I clicked it open, and as I read the document, the words in the report burned in my mind. Patient name, Sean M. Current status, unemployed, homeless, following eviction, isolated. Diagnosis, chronic delusional disorder, severe. Current delusion, structured employment as a data entry clerk for an imaginary insurance company. Uses the abandoned former worksite as an anchor for the delusion. Daily behavior, breaks into defunct job site, sits at desk, performs repetitive, meaningless actions, typing on blank documents for 8 hours. Uses public transport to maintain the illusion of financial autonomy. My stomach dropped out of my body. It wasn't my memory or the world that was broken. It was me. Every weird glance, every disappearing building, every change in the trash bin, it was all logged here, in my own files. I dragged my eyes from the screen, looking around the dilapidated room again. No coworkers, no stacks of paper, just cold, still air. I felt the card that the cab driver had given me in my pocket. The weird things that have been happening have been terrifying, and the text on the screen was enough to seal the deal for me. I was done living this way. I was going to call the doctor. I pushed my hand into my pocket and pulled out the doctor's business card. I held it in my hand, studying it for a while. I knew that it was supposed to be a good thing, the thing that saves me, but it felt dangerous in my hand. I started dialing the number, but as I got to the third digit, I froze. I realized that I would be trading all of my comfort away for a reality I never agreed to participate in. I thought about how I would be trading all of my stability and everything I know for a tomorrow that was guaranteed to be worse. A reality where I didn't have a home, a job, or any friends. I didn't want to do that. I felt angry, sad, and confused, but I knew what I wanted to do. I tore the car to pieces, and as each piece fell, the room changed. Until suddenly, I was sitting at my desk, surrounded by towering stacks of paperwork. On my desk was a fresh mocha coffee with my name on it. I sat down and started working. After I finished the first stack, I grabbed my coffee and took a sip. What I expected to taste and what I tasted were different things entirely. I was expecting to taste mocha, but when I took a sip of my coffee, the coffee was caramel. Hi, my name is... Well, I shouldn't say it. Saying it out loud might be enough for him to find me. It feels strange writing this. I've spent my entire life running from something I can't explain. Something I did when I was just a kid. Something that changed my family's fate and mine. Something that is now, as the deadline approaches, ready to collect its price. It all began with a stare from outside my bedroom door. I was around 12 or 13, living with my parents. Every single night, without fail, I felt someone standing outside my room. A cold, heavy, unmoving presence. I never heard footsteps, never heard breathing, just eyes. Eyes that pushed through the darkness and into my skull. I barely slept. 1 or 2 hours at most. The rest of the night I lay awake, trembling, waiting for that thing to come in. And my home wasn't safe either. My dad drank too much. He yelled at us, hit us if something wasn't clean. My mom cried almost every night. Fights, slammed doors, broken things, and always, outside my room, his eyes, patient, heavy, hungry. I was just a kid. There was nothing I could do. When my grandfather got sick, everything got worse. My mom's father suddenly became very ill. His strength drained away like something was feeding on him. My uncle, her brother, and a severe drug addict lived in the same house. He treated my mom like a servant. She came home every day in tears, exhausted and helpless. For the first time in years, my parents began working together, trying to survive the misery. But I was drowning in nightmares. Nightmares where the thing outside my door walked into my room, where it touched my face with hands made of smoke. And one night, for the first time, it spoke clearly. Offer her to me. I will make your dreams come true. I didn't understand. I didn't know who it wanted, but the words got stuck inside me like a hook. The game that wasn't a game. One afternoon at school, a classmate showed us a website that supposedly let you contact demons. This was years before AI. We entered it. We asked simple questions. What's my name? Who's next to me? It answered everything correctly. We laughed until the letters typed themselves out on the screen. Your soul is a good price. A cold shiver stabbed straight through my spine. I left the classroom without saying a word. The pact. That night, my mom came home crying. My uncle, high out of his mind, had urinated and defecated right in front of my dying grandfather's bed. The stress made his condition worse. They rushed him to the hospital. While my mom cried in the living room, the thing appeared at my door, and it smiled. That was the moment I understood. My soul was what it wanted. I barely slept an hour. At dawn, I was broken. I looked up rituals online, ways to sell your soul. None of them seemed real. But that night, the thing walked to the kitchen without looking at me, like it wanted me to follow. I did. It was standing there, unmoving, a dark mass that breathed. On the table beside it lay a shiny kitchen knife, and a thought not mine slipped into my mind. Cut your hand. Press it to your chest. Tell him it's his. Promise that no one around you will ever suffer again. I obeyed. I cut myself, pressed my bloody hand to my chest, spoke the words it wanted, and everything changed. The price started the next morning. I woke up with no wound, no blood, no pain. I thought I had imagined it. But when I went to the kitchen, my mom told me, "Your grandfather died last night." She was strangely calm, relieved even. For the first time in years, my parents began getting along. My siblings seemed happier. My girlfriend loved me more. Everything got better for them. But for me, everything went. Hell came to collect what it was owed. My girlfriend cheated on me with my best friends. People at school kept trying to fight me. I got sick, then sicker. Nightmares replaced sleep entirely. Whenever I tried to pray, my body rebelled. After going to church, my legs seized up. I couldn't walk for days. When I tried to say the Lord's Prayer, I vomited blood. He didn't want competition. And every night, when I closed my eyes, he was there, smiling, watching, closer, every time. As an adult, I tried running. I moved far away, cut my family off to protect them. He stopped appearing physically, but my life became poisoned. Accidents, illness, loss, betrayal, money disappearing, opportunities failing at the last second. Everything I touch falls apart. And sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I still see that smile. The deadline. There's something I never said. Something I heard in my head the night I made the pact. When you turn 30, I will come for your soul. But there was a clause. He cannot kill me. I must reach 30 alive, so he can take what's his. If I die before then, I don't know what happens. But if I reach that age, I don't want to imagine it. I don't want to write it. I don't want to know. Why I'm posting this? Because I have only a few months left. Because maybe someone has been through something similar. Because maybe someone knows what to do. Because I don't sleep anymore. I barely eat. I barely exist. And when I close my eyes, I see his smile, the same one from the night I gave away the only thing that was truly mine. My soul, my identity, my end. Asterisk, asterisk. I won't say my name, because if I do, he will hear it. Asterisk, asterisk. And he will come to collect. The aurora borealis has been waving over these Kansan skies the past few nights. It's absolutely breathtaking, and something I never thought I'd get the chance to behold. I didn't think it'd be one of the last things I saw, though. I don't recommend you look, if it's over you. See, an hour ago, I was watching some horror drama series, smoking a joint, happy as can be. My black lab, Shadow, started pawing at the basement door, which is my signal that he needs to relieve himself. My joint was done anyway, so I put it out, paused my stream, and tossed my phone to the couch. I've heard about the northern lights making their way to our skies, seen pictures from my friends, but hadn't gotten the chance to see it with my own eyes. When I walk out onto my back patio, it's nearly pitch black. Nothing new, considering all my neighbors aside from the one directly next door have kids and go to bed rather early. Everyone's got homemade privacy fences via some trees and very overgrown weeds, which lends a hand in blocking any light. Shadow darted off into some corner of the yard, as he always does. The air was chilly, so I'd pulled my sweater just a little closer around me, and that's when I saw it. The pink lights dancing in the distance. They weren't directly over my head, but if I stood in one particular spot, I could see it. At first, I almost cried. It was beautiful. It waved and danced and made me grateful for being alive, being on this planet, and getting to experience things like that. I stared at the sky for what felt like forever, until the grass rustling and a bark grabbed my attention. I shouted my dog's name as I walked back towards the back door to my home, ready to slide it open. I hear Shadow's footsteps start barreling towards me. I slid the door open for him, but tried to peer through the leaves of our redbud tree for one final glimpse of the rare phenomena before heading inside. Shadow's collar jingled just as he ran past me into the house. Even though I'd heard his footsteps, he seemed to almost appear out of nowhere from the shadows and into that moment of light. He was running so fast, he was a blur of black as he darted past me inside and up the stairs. I felt my heart skip a bit, but chalked it up to anxiety from smoking. I locked the door and closed the blinds before heading back to continue couch rotting, but stopped in my tracks when I got to the top of the stairs. Shadow was standing in the middle of my living room staring at me. I laughed at myself and told him to stop being creepy, figuring we could both go for a little treat. I walked past him and into the kitchen. An ice cream pop for myself and a pig ear for Shadow. Normally, the crinkle of the bag is enough to make him come running. I'd all but put it back, and he still hadn't come to claim his prize. I call his name again, then peer out into the living room. The ice cream in my hand falls to the floor as a scream rips from my throat. Shadow looked like Shadow, but was now actively morphing into some stretched and skewed version of him. I heard snapping as he grew unfathomably. Quite quickly, I'll add, before his neck became too long to hold up on its own. His head fell to the wooden floor with a thud. My dog, or what was my dog, smiled, then, with its newly elongated limbs, started pushing its still bursting body towards me with too fast of a pace. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. The stairs to my attic area, where my bedroom is, are luckily accessed through the kitchen. I sprinted up them, straight to my room and slammed my door shut, just as two large of paws thud up the stairs after me. I've always loved that my space has hidden pocket doors, but now I'm not so keen. Just as I turned the tiny lock on my door, the door started shaking on its track as the exploded version of my dog started banging on it. I thought myself brilliant for choosing my bedroom over the office or the closet, since this room is the only one of the three with a window. The first thing I did was race over to my window. It opens right to the roof of my attached garage, which would make for a relatively easy escape. I was halfway there, feeling the rough shingles under my bare feet, before I looked up and noticed my next-door neighbor, Hunter, staring out of his window and directly into mine. I yelled his name, telling him I needed help, but he just stood there, staring at me. He smiled quickly, raising his hands up for a moment. Then his smile faded as his hands moved down slowly. He did it again, then again, and by the third time, I was already terrified. He made it worse when the fourth time, he kept his hands raised and the grin plastered on his face. He stared at me, then wiggled his fingers. Had the lights in his room not been on, it'd have been impossible to read his lips. They were on, though, and as I read the words, "Gotcha," he, too, started, sporadically snapping and stretching into something inhuman. I scurried over to the edge of my roof, and just before I leaped over the edge, a shadowy figure in the middle of the road shifted, scraping the gravel beneath it. I froze and watched it for a moment. When it didn't start exploding, I felt relief, which went away as fast as it came when the figure started running towards me. I screamed again and then looked back into my bedroom. The door was holding true, but banging against its track like nobody's business. Another glance to Hunter, still in his window peering over at me, showed that he no longer resembled anything close to human. He reminded me of those snake fireworks that you light and they just grow and grow until they turn to ash and fizzle out. All the color had removed itself from his skin. His eyes were gaunt, and he just kept stretching. I thought, fuck this, and crawled back into my bedroom. That's when The banging on my door stopped, and the singing started. I'm verily merrily, but here quite contrarily. Why don't you let me in? Don't be afraid, I'll be quick, let you live. Promise, I just want your skin. Why don't you let me in? I scrambled for my phone for almost a full minute before I realized I left it on the couch. Thankfully, my laptop still has a little bit of juice in it. Shitty thing is, none of my messages will go through. I can't send chats, emails, nothing. I've run out of options, so I'm going to try posting this as a last-ditch effort. I'm not sure what to do. Has anybody else experienced this shit? What the fuck do I do? The fucking thing that took over my dog won't stop singing the same thing over and over, though the lyrics have changed in the last few seconds. Why don't you let me in? Let me in? Let me in? Let me in! Let me in! Let me in! Let me in! The weed I smoked was near the end of my stash, and I didn't have near an experience like this any other time. I've smoked it, so it feels safe to rule out. If I don't make it through the night, and it comes out that I've been found as a curled up ashen turd, please heed this warning. Whatever is making these Midwestern night skies pink and red isn't the northern lights. I think it's something evil. If you do get a glimpse, you might just want to let them in, because right now, that's the only thought running through my head. That, and a jingle that's becoming incessant enough, I'm starting to hum it. Quite contrarily, I'm here and verily merrily, I think I'll let them in. I won't be afraid. They'll be quick. Let me live. They just want my skin. I think I'll let them in.